Hey guys, thanks for joining us again today. We're going over Build Your VFX CGIQ again. Today we're actually going over asset building in 3ds Max. So my name is Dominique Boutsiet. I'm actually the technical support specialist here at Autodesk for 3ds Max, along with my co-presenter John Bell. And today this session will be moderated by David Santos, so if you have any questions, him and John Bell will be monitoring that. So let's do some formal introductions if people have missed this previously. So I myself am Dominique, and I'm located in the Boston office in Massachusetts. And previously I worked for a production company that did medical animation and a lot of forensic animations. So there was a lot of case trial studies that I worked on and things of that nature. And if David doesn't mind, I'm going to have him introduce himself again and kind of go over his background. So David, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
No problem at all. Hi guys, this is David Santos. I have been in product support for about 5 years now with Autodesk and currently residing in the San Francisco office. Been doing the Maya stuff for quite some time and like 9 years or so, and then kind of moving towards using Stingray a lot more, doing game development stuff. So that's it.
All right, and let's move on to John Bell. John, do you want to introduce yourself to everyone? Well, John Bell is based out of the Lake O office, and he's also a 3ds Max technical support specialist, and he's worked in this industry for about 13 years doing production work and all kinds of visual effects animations. And I think Hussein, are you able to introduce yourself today? I guess not. So Hussein is also another Maya technical support specialist, and he works here in the Boston office with myself. And you might recognize him from the last 2 sessions that we've had. So before we get started though, feel free if you have any questions at all. There's a little question section there. John again and David will be moderating these. There's also a chat window, so if you feel like talking amongst yourselves, by all means, please use these as they're available to you. So let's get started. So I just kind of wanted to touch upon some things today. I know Hussein had previously gone over project folder organization and file setup, but really what does that include? So that includes organization of your directories and creating file structures. So when you're starting a project, be it if you're at a production studio or if you're doing a project for yourself, you should really always consider setting up a good directory for all of your images, for your renderings, for your scene files, any bitmaps or textures you'll be using for the project, just so they're easily accessible, you know where they're located, that sort of thing. So this is more of like the external directories, you know, maybe you have it set up so you can find these in your window file explorer, things like that. But going from that, we also want to make sure we're organizing our Max scenes or your Maya scenes for that matter. So this is all done internally. You don't want to have, you know, in a pipeline production where you're sending a file up to somebody else who's going to be looking at it or working with it and have, you know, maybe no folder set up, you know, any type of duplicated assets, things like that that weren't meant to be in the file being sent over in the pipeline. So those are things that just to consider when you're working, you know, either with a small group, a large company, and even for yourself, just to keep the organization there so everything is readily accessible and easy to find. And then you definitely want to take a look at naming conventions when you're saving your files, or even when you're naming assets. But when you're naming files, you definitely want to include specific information because this is going to be your identifier for where this, you know, what this file is referencing, where it may be located, things of that nature. So you can see I have like a little snippet right here. This is for Build Your VFX IQ. It's related to the gadget we're working on. It's version 1 and it's iteration 1. And you can see underneath that, I have version 2, and then I have an iteration 1, 2, 3, and so on. So that's really important to remember because it'll help you be able to find things more easily. And if you're working in this pipeline and you find later on down the road you're working on a project and somebody tells you, well, let's go back to the version I saw earlier, then you actually have that. So you're not saving over files and losing work that you'd previously done and may need to revert back to at some point. It's also really good in case something happens to your scene file. I'm sure we've all experienced this at some point or another where your scene, may crash or, something gets corrupted and you're working on a deadline. It's always nice to have those as backup so you have a good starting point to work from again if necessary. And I know John wanted to jump in on this and talk a little about naming conventions for UNC paths. So let's see, John, are you there? I guess he's not, but that's okay. There we go.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Yeah, this is John Bell, and yeah, just to sort of comment on what Dominic mentioned, we actually see a number of issues here in tech support with people working with local paths, and they're trying to render across the network, say using Backburner, another renderer, or they're pulling assets from across the network, and they are using a local path names. And even if you have, say, like an NAS or a RAID on your network, it's got a name, it's just like, X, or Z, and you've got a project folder in there, just like, X:/projects. You don't actually want to have your scene assets pulled from that, because all the computers on your network, or say you have other people in a production pipeline, across the network, their computers are still going to see that X drive. They're going to interpret that as a local drive. Basically, and again, even if it's shared, even if it's a shared asset and you've got all your permissions set up, that way, it's the difference between setting up a local path, even if it's shared, or a UNC path, which stands for Universal Naming Convention, is kind of like the difference between saying 123 Main Street and then the full address. If you say 123 Main Street, that's great, except that each computer is going to interpret that as being your town, whereas a UNC path is like saying 123 Main Street, your specific town, your specific state, the zip code, and your country. So that's why you want to do this. You want to always have your scene assets pathed that way with UNC paths. So they're going to be the file format, the format of the name typically is double backslash the machine name, and then backslash the directory, and then slash possibly subdirectory, and then the file name. And I guarantee you, if you're working in professional production, you will absolutely be adhering to whatever the company's naming conventions are, and you will get your hands slapped if if you're trying to keep all your assets and stuff just on your local machine. It's in production. You're going to have a central repository, and you're going to be accessing and pulling assets from that repository with UNC paths. The other thing, a very, very useful tool that a surprising number of Macs users don't take advantage of, is the asset tracking menu. You go to File, Manage, and Asset Tracking, and there you can keep track of where all of your scene assets are being pathed to and from. And ideally, again, you want to change all those paths from a local drive letter, even if it's a shared drive, like an NAS or a RAID, change that to a UNC path, so the path goes through the network to get to that final destination. And finally, I want to mention something else that just sort of a rule of thumb you want to try and do is, even though you are going through this this long series of folder and path names with UNC paths, Still try to keep those paths as short as possible if you are using Windows. Windows has a built-in 256 character path and file name limit, and if you exceed that, you can have issues pulling your assets and also rendering to to a final render destination. So that's why it's also well advised to not try and keep stuff off your desktop as a working environment, because then you're automatically pathing to your local C drive, users, My Documents, et cetera, et cetera. It's the path is automatically added to quite a bit. So that's the thing I wanted to emphasize about UNC paths versus local paths.
Awesome. Thank you, John. So yeah, as you can see, that's really important when you're naming your files, just in terms of pathing itself and assets being found. The other thing I wanted to mention was not just naming conventions for files, but also naming your scene assets. It may not seem like a big deal when you're starting a project, say you have maybe 1 or 2 things in your scene, but as that scene grows, or as different individuals work on it, so on and so forth, you can end up with a lot of objects that don't have any specific reference, no name distinguishing what they are. So it makes selecting things in your scene a little harder, maybe not for yourself if you're familiar with the file, but if you're passing it off to another user, it might be difficult for them to sort through your scene and be able to find the object or the asset they're looking for to maybe make edits to or reference. So that's really important as well. So just keep that in mind in your scene file. And I know there's instances you are able to name objects the same name, but keep in mind if you're rendering to something like A360, duplicate named objects will not render to A360, so just something to keep in mind. I usually try to make all of my asset names unique, and as they should kind of be. So just something to think about when you're working with your Mac scene. So the next thing I wanted to discuss was types of modeling. So in Macs, there are several ways to model the same object, essentially. There's always more than one way to go about something. Being a creative 3D program, you're able to find different avenues to work, especially to your liking. Depending on where you're working, they might have one particular workflow that they use. I know one of the companies I used to work for specifically only allowed for box modeling. Spline modeling is a little more difficult to convert for certain aspects of jobs, so it might be something to think about in the long run when you're modeling. But essentially, poly or box modeling, you're basically just starting with a primitive object. You're starting with a baseline object, and from there you're making all of these changes, all of these edits. You're extruding faces, you're chamfering edges, you're adding geometry to basically make your final object or asset. So right here, we can see we have just a T-Rex. You can see all of the divisions for the baseline box modeling. And then you also have spline modeling. So spline modeling essentially is using lines or curves. I know from Maya, curves translate into curves and also splines in 3ds Max. But spline modeling is essentially using those lines to create geometry. So you can do this in several different ways. I actually do have this example to go over after, basically making a wine glass from just a spline line. So that's just something else that you might keep in mind is there's ways to do this. You can even character model with spline modeling. I've done that in the past. It's not my favorite. It's definitely doable, and the end results can come out very nicely. But there's just different ways to do everything. And then there's planar modeling. It's similar to box modeling, but I know a lot of people also call this edge modeling, where you're basically taking the edges of a polygon and you're just dragging them out to just create more and more geometry. And usually you would do this with orthographic drawings if you have them. This particular image here is from the Joan of Arc tutorial, which I hope some of you are aware of. If not, I do have the link to this at the end because it does include planar modeling and box modeling. But it's good to be acquainted with in case you are, doing some in-depth face modeling. I have used this before for modeling faces and have found it produces great results. So another way to model in Max. So if we move on, we have orthographic drawings. And most projects that you start, if you're modeling an asset, you either will have these provided or you will need to create them yourself if you're drawing them. I know a lot of times these are provided, so you usually get a top view, a front view, and the side views of the object so that you can put them in your viewport, like Hussein had showed us last week, where you can map them onto a plane and cross-section them so that you can work and model the object accordingly. Isometric view is, again, a different type of display where you can view the object without perspective lines. So again, these are something that you would probably start a project with, either given or drawn from reference. So unfortunately, this is not how we started our project. We started, say a client gives you a reference and they tell you to make that asset. So you would probably do the best you can just using the reference given to create that object. All right, so let's kind of get into Max here. I'm going to get out of this really quick. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to go into that reference I showed you guys earlier for the wine glass. So this is spline modeling. So essentially, we're just taking a plane and a line. So here I have just a generic plane with a UV map on it for the wine glass so that we have that texture there. So as you can see, we have that line right in front of it, and you would just go in here and you would go to your shapes and just create a line. And for reference, I know there are probably some people out there, well, a wine glass doesn't exactly have a full top like that. So you would just go in and model accordingly. So you would kind of, create your line, come down here, and just make these edges, and then you'd also come inside so it does have an inside to it as well. Because when you go to your Modify panel, if we use a lathe, so right down here in your Modify panel, if we go to lathe, it's right here. So if we turn that on, and we can, maybe it starts like this. But if we go all the way around, you can see that it creates the full shape of a wine glass. And again, if we make sure that the spline line itself is actually following the contour of the inside of the glass, we won't have to worry about deleting edges up here and actually hollowing that portion out. So just a quick way to show you some spline modeling. It's very useful for things like bowls, any type of circular objects. I've found this tool is particularly useful for. So just to get that in there as well. But let's hop into the gadget that we were modeling previously. So I know some of you were here last week, and Hussein had started modeling this. So this is the top device that we see in this perspective plane here. So this is the top device that Hussein had modeled for us last week. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to go in and kind of make this secondary portion of the gadget. So like I said, I kind of took some time here to go through and make different folders for everything. I made one for my camera, for the lights that I have in the scene, different pieces of this so that it's not confusing for another artist if they're coming in to work with it. So if I hide the concept art, you can turn that on and off. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to hide this top gadget piece. So you can see this is the bottom portion of it. So what I did was I essentially made two different versions of this because I wanted to show how you're able to go in and use different tools to kind of model the same object. So essentially if we look right here, let's turn this on. So I have two different models. So, and we're going to get to both of them. I quickly wanted to show both of these though, as they're modeled completely differently. And this one is actually all one object, whereas this kind of folds over itself. So say if you have something that needed to be animated or rigged with strapping on the leather wrist piece, that might be something to consider doing you know, with this particular model, whereas this one is more game ready. You know, say the character doesn't really need access to the straps, they just need to be modeled and be there and visible. Those are things that you want to kind of take into consideration when you start working on something, and you know, definitely get insight from either your client or you know, whoever your manager or production manager is for that kind of thing. But essentially, we're going to hide this again, and we're going to go in and kind of take a look and break these down. So this is the top piece here. So if we come in, and please, this is just for reference purposes, please don't ever keep your modifier stacks like this. It's really bad practice, and I'm just doing this to show you guys right now, just to have it so I can show you the steps. But yeah, this is a no-no. Don't do this. So let's go ahead and let's turn all this off, and we will walk through this. So essentially, I have these two prongs, and how I got this was from taking Hussein's piece, and you see we want them to fit perfectly in here, and that was my issue previously. If you don't have an asset from somebody else who's modeling it and your work is dependent on that, it's very hard to get started if you don't have those things. So from here, I kind of went in, and don't mind all these. So if we go in here, I can select his polys, and right now I have by angle on, so for the facing. So if we go in here and I just quickly isolate, I can go in and I can select all of these edges. So in doing this, I can kind of get, you know, the overall shape for those particular things. And what I did was, I like to personally, to be accurate, I like to detach this as a different object, and then just go ahead and cap and create from there. So let's go ahead and kind of show how to do that. Let's go ahead, and I would detach kind of as a clone, because we don't want to detach the actual object or the actual polys from this. We want to detach as a clone so that we have, you know, if we get out of the sub-object mode here, we have this individual piece. So we can slide that out and see, oh hey, you know, this fits in perfectly now because it was part of the other model. And I mean, if we go into this, you know, we see that all of these polys are flipped. So if we want to flip them so that their normals are correct, we can go in and use the flip tool. And from there, if we go in, we can just kind of delete some of these unnecessary lines. So you can come in here, and let's get these right now. So we don't need all these. This is just my method of working. I like to be as accurate as possible, so I take the shape from something previously. You could totally go in and just make a box in just front view and kind of model it out that way as well. These are just ways, you know, kind of, they might not be the most intuitive, but just other things to think about, that there's always another way, if you will. So from here, I would go in and just kind of delete all of, oops, there we go. Control backspace to get rid of, you know, some of these lines. But from here, I already have this set up. So let's end this isolate, and we can hide that selection. So if I already have that set up, I'll show you with all the lines deleted and proper, you know, proper geometry. So you can see I kind of kept some of these edges here or added new ones so that my open subdivision worked and it didn't round everything, you know, so that it actually had some sort of edge to it, or some defined edge at least, a crease if you will. But I know Hussein had been working with subdivisions, and this is another thing to keep in mind when you're working, is that if somebody else has started a project and they're using some sort of smoothing tool on their previous object, try to be consistent with what you're using. So Maya doesn't, I think Maya doesn't have a turbo smooth, is what Hussein said. There's a mesh smooth, but things like that you want to keep in mind when you're going through this, because if I don't have those to use as modifiers, maybe the model won't be as consistent. So from here, if we come down this modifier stack, and we'll say yes because I'm working with this. So you can see my next step was basically taking this whole piece here and bridging it together. So if we go in, you know, we can go in here, and if we take this, essentially what we would do is, you know, connect these pieces. And then from there, oops, there we go, we'd come up and we'd make our insertion points for this gadget. So if we were to do that, we could, let's just make a new model here. Okay, so let's go in and delete some of these. And so let's go into top view on this one and kind of show you exactly how to get that. So I would select these edges because currently we don't have any open areas for this particular piece. So we could go in here and connect. So I usually like to start at 0 and then start moving them around. So let's say this one's a little bit longer. So we can go in here, and then we can select these edges again and connect. And this time we want 2 edges. Actually, we could probably get away with just 1. We'll go ahead and just have 1 for now. So now we have lines set up where we can actually make these insets. So first, let's go ahead and make the longer inset in the back. So I'm going to select the top and bottom polys for this particular piece. And then I'm just going to go to Inset. And then we can, oops, we don't want to do that. All right. Well, maybe this is not working because of this edit poly. All right, let's see. Okay, so that is not working. So let's go ahead and delete. All right, we'll start again here. So essentially what you can do is, let's go in, because this is all one piece. We'll come in here and we can connect. We don't want it up there. So we can connect, and we'll connect another piece over here. And we can move this up a little bit. And for these, I don't worry about if the edges are, you know, angled slightly, because you can always come into your constraints portion of the geometry rollout, and you can go ahead and rotate them yourself around the edges like this. So if you want to loop, you know, you go in, make sure you have it all selected, and then just turn them accordingly. So this is just a quick, dirty way to do this. And let's go in here and delete these. So let's go ahead and delete these. Obviously, you would want to go in and make sure that you have the top piece connected here as well initially, but that's okay. We can go from here and kind of use this top gadget to kind of mark where we are. So let's go ahead and bridge this. So if we're bridging this, let's see, maybe that's not going to work out. Oh, I know why that's not working, because we still have it on constraints. We don't want that on constraints for edges when we're bridging. It will not come out properly, or like that apparently. All right, one more time. There we go. Okay. let's go ahead and, all right. Oh, I still have it on edges. There we go. So right now I'm just going to weld these vertices because this is not playing nicely with me. Oh, you know what? It might be because of that. All right, scratch that. Let's go ahead and end this isolate. Anyways, you get the idea of how to move this across and kind of connect these. Unfortunately, right now I have additional edges. So like Hussein was speaking about last week is, you want to make the model as simplistic as possible when you're first starting out so you don't run into issues like this, where you have all these vertices, all the extra vertices down here. These are kind of the extra lines that will crease something for you as you're working going forward when you're using like an open subdivision, a turbo smooth, so you have those nice hard lines. But currently, because I'm trying to connect these two, it won't let me because I have extra vertices over here that aren't currently in this middle piece here. So just keep that in mind when you're working as well. So let's go ahead and hide that. And so from here, essentially the next piece we'll be going into is kind of coming in and making an inset. So you see we have these nicely defined insets, and you can really just go in and say you have a box. And we'll kind of just make it like this. We'll just move it up a little bit. But if you have a box, and just like this, you can kind of, I like to convert it to an editable poly. You don't have to. You can always put an edit poly modifier on top of it. You can go in here and kind of use the edges and connect again. Move them accordingly. So let's go put one here. We'll put another here, and then we'll select the polygons in this one and hit Inset, and you'll see that you'll get a nice inset now. So unfortunately before, because we had so many additional edges from the previous model that I had currently went ahead to make so that I could show you guys the final product, because of those edges you're getting some strange output afterwards because you're trying to do these parameters and functions that just aren't going to work if you already have geometry set up like that. So let's go ahead and do this for the next one. And this is just to kind of get you familiar with how to do insets for this. So you'd go in here, and we'll just say, we'll say that's okay for now. We'll say that's enough. And I'll show you how to go in and edit afterwards if you need to. So let's go ahead and do that. So that doesn't look right. These are too wide. So what I like to do sometimes is come into the vertices if I haven't necessarily exactly hit the mark for the model I'm making, and I can kind of slide these over just to kind of get it to be more the shape that I need. So now you can see, we still have that box, but now we have some insets here where we can select the polygons and delete them. So I just went through and deleted all of these. Same thing as I did over on this model. And if you select the border, you can come in here, and there's a bridge feature. So if you hit bridge, it'll basically connect all of the sides together. So I like to use this a lot for gaps like this. If I want to make a hole, maybe a hole through something, it's very helpful in that sense. You can also use cap, but you have to define the actual edges here from corner to corner, which makes it a little more difficult. So bridge is a really good tool to be using for something like this. So now you have those actual insets or cutout portions of this model. So let's go ahead and get out of this really quickly. And next you can kind of see in here, I went in and added actual geometry and extra edges here. Let me go ahead, oops, there we go. Go into loop, and you can see I added these edges just so that when we're using the open subdivision, the smoothing doesn't make it more circular than it needs to be. It kind of defines that in the sense. And also, just for reference, I am in Isometric View. If I hit P, I get perspective. So anytime you rotate around your viewport from like a orthographic mode or orthographic view, such as like front or side, things like that, you'll get an isometric view, which kind of can throw you off, but just hit P and you can return to perspective mode again. So from there, we have, you know, all of our defined edges. And now it's essentially just going in and making those minor adjustments. You know, we're moving vertices down. So here, I just essentially did what I showed you earlier with this box that we used insets on, and just manipulated the vertices and moved them around so that they're adjusted according to you know, the leather piece that we have below. And then finally, we have the open subdivision, which, you know, essentially will smooth it as a smoothing modifier. So if we get out of this isolation mode, we can go now to both of these. Oops, there we go. Both of these. So you can see we have this wrist object here. So if we take all of these modifiers off, just show you from start to finish here. And we can actually hide this bracket for now. We literally just have a tube. So, you know, just going in here and going to tube and creating a tube. And, you know, maybe I like to turn on my angle snaps and rotate this so that we have it like that. And you can go in and, you know, change the radius however you want. So here for a tube, you know, maybe you don't need this many segments, like I said, or this many sides. It makes it a lot more difficult to go in and edit easily if you have more edges or more polygons, things like that. So for me, I think I kept it pretty low here, maybe 15, maybe less than that, maybe 10. Yeah, about 10. So I think I kept it around 10 here. So from here, what I did was I went in and let's go to the stack that I can show you. And please don't mind the material on here. This is, we can actually go in and just drag a generic material on just so it's not distracting, because we're not actually learning UVW unwrapping right now. So I just wanted to throw a quick texture on there to kind of get you guys acquainted that you can use very simplistic UVs just to kind of gauge where your model is, what you want it to look like. John and I were talking before. It's much easier to go in and have an object with some sort of a texture on it just to get an idea in kind of the direction you want to go in with that model. So that's what that was for, but not to get too far off topic. So again, for this particular model, let's say I convert this to an editable poly. We can go in here and go to polygon, and I just select, you know, these in here, and we can do another inset. And, you know, maybe I want to go much further in this time, hit OK. And then for this one, you know, maybe we don't have, you know, maybe we have to go in and kind of edit these vertices and kind of move them around. So feel free, because you can unwrap this later and change your UVs. But for here, kind of just get an idea by moving that. And then going underneath to the bottom, insetting again. And, you know, we want it about the same size. And from here, we'll go in, inset again. And this should stay in, as long as your scene is open, that inset, last inset you did previously should stay in memory. So you can see it does the exact same inset as before. Maybe I want it a little bigger, who knows. So from here, we can go in, kind of select all of our polys again, and delete. And then go to border and then bridge them again. So similar process here, kind of creating the holes. Now you have this, and it's a little similar. I went and probably spent a little more time on this one just so we have it to show you guys. But now here's kind of the fun part. You get to add these little leather strap pieces that come sticking out. So what I did was I essentially went in here and kind of like I showed you earlier, if we take this piece actually, let's move it over just so you can see. Kind of just took this piece here, and if I go to edge, you can create, I'm sorry, not edge. If we go to polys, I kind of just took this and extruded this out. So this is the Extrude Tool. This will basically take the faces you have selected and extrude them outwards. You can do this by just the group. You can do it by the local normal, or you can do it by polygon, where it actually will separate the polys. So right now we just kind of want it by group. And so let's go ahead and kind of extrude that out. So you may be looking at this going, how does that even work? And essentially what I did was I went in here and just target welded some of these so that they are not sticking out, so that they kind of have that smooth transition in to the portion that we'll be wrapping around. And from there, you can just kind of go in and select your polys that you want, and you can extrude those outwards. And you can even use bevel. It might be more beneficial to use this towards the end of the strap where it kind of tapers off, because essentially, say we extrude this out, and let's extrude it maybe a few more times. So let's do this. We'll turn that. So maybe we want to start beveling this portion out. So you can kind of see with bevel, you get an extrude, but you also can manipulate the ends here, where you can kind of taper them off, or you can maybe make them wider depending on what you need for your model. So for here, I went ahead and I kind of beveled the ends just to kind of get that strap feel coming off of there. And again, I went in and kind of took these edges, looped them around, and then also you can go into the edge mode again and manipulate them accordingly, so you can move them specifically up and down these lines if you need to. And depending on your view, you can change it to local or screen. Local will work in the direction that the local axis of the object is, and then screen is basically whatever position you're viewing on your screen, the gizmo will be facing you. But from here, if we come out of this, we can come in, and so these are just kind of little end flourishes here. I added some additional lines and segments so that the open subdivision would work properly. Went in and kind of scaled the ends of these, so you can always take this model and go to vertices, take these. And what I like to do when things kind of taper off or have some sort of a fall off is use soft selection. I'm not sure that a lot of people will use soft selection for these types of things, but I know I like to, just so I can get that nice kind of taper. So I kind of just go in and we'll scale things a little bit and maybe move them around, but you get the idea that as the, let's turn it off of edge mode too. As you go through with soft selection, you can see that that fall off affects less and less of the model as it goes from red to blue. So that's a nice little feature to work with if you're kind of making changes that you don't want to affect the entire model with.
Hey, Dom.
Hey.
Hey, Dom. I just wanted to give you kind of a time, or let you know that we have about 16 minutes. So, yeah.
All right, let me finish up here, and then we'll go to questions.
Cool.
Awesome. Thank you. So from here, we kind of just made the bottom portion the same exact way we made the top, just kind of doing that inset, delete the the poly faces and then the bridging. I just did some very minimal FFD work here, so I'll go ahead and show you that really quickly. So this is the texture that we had applied just for reference, and our open subdivision, so you kind of get that polished end look. And then, like I said, we have the FFD modifier, which was previously shown as an end result down here. But this is, it's actually a great tool to use to manipulate a lattice. So you have control points with vertices that you can affect the model with. So you can kind of move it around, stretch it out. If you want to make this wider, you can make it wider, you can make it skinnier. So it's always a good tool to have. And for your FFDs, you have different lattice types. Let me get to it. So you have ones with control points that are 2, 3, and 4 for the FFD boxes. But so that would be how you finish modeling this particular piece. And if we end isolate, I want to kind of go over here really quick. Move this out of the way. And let's go ahead and show this piece. So this is the same thing as over here, except this was done in a different manner. So let's go ahead and go through all of this. So essentially what I did here was I started with just a box. It has some segmentation so that I'm going to eventually put a bend modifier on it. So we want more segmentation on this initially so that it can actually complete that bend or that transformation. But I kind of already had an idea where I was going with this, so I just extruded the ends here. I made one end shorter and the other end longer. And again, please don't mind the mapping. It's, again, not mapped properly. And so from here, we just extruded the ends, made this side longer so it would wrap around. And then, like I was showing earlier, you can go in here and adjust your edges. So if we go in here, you can always just adjust your edges and move them around and ring or loop them so that you can move them so that you can create any bends in the geometry that you would like. And from there, I went ahead and did exactly what we had done before, which is the inset. We can ignore the mapping, kind of, gives you a better idea of the texture there. We have the subdivision to kind of give us, our smoothing here. And then finally we have the bend, which, because I'm already in, oops, there we go. So you don't want to be, there we go. You don't want to be on a polygon or an element or something inside of an edit poly when you have a modifier like this on it, because it will read the whole that whole selection essentially inside that edit poly rather than the object itself. So for here, before it was, when you saw that pinching, it was reading just those particular polys that I had selected inside rather than the whole model. So with bend, if you apply a bend modifier, you can go in and adjust how much of an angle you want on this. So again, if you had something animating where it's, maybe wrapping around a wrist, this could be a good way to do it with minimal rigging involved. So just something to think about. And again, I have the FFD on there just to kind of give it some good shape. So I think that's about it. And we'll go to some questions if anybody has questions right now. David, did anybody have questions? Or
one question that came in was basically, I answered it somewhat, but I just wanted to get some more input from you and then from John if John has any. But it was basically, do you recommend having both Max and Maya in the same pipeline? And then, or?
I think it's best if people usually work with the same product. If they're in a production studio, chances are you will probably be working with either Max or Maya. You probably wouldn't be forced to work with Maya if you're not familiar with it, and vice versa. So I think for the most part, it's recommended just to have one specific software to work with. The interop ability is very nice, though, in case you are working with somebody else, outside of your pipeline who has a model that they need to give to you to kind of hand off to work further with.
Yeah, in my experience, are dead, where everyone has their own individual piece of software, and everything that they don't use is the enemy. What you'll find in production is that production studios will have a variety of tools and a variety of people who use them, and they all have to to work together. So you may be hired to play to your strengths as a modeler using 3ds Max, or as an effects person or a TD using Maya. And at this point, the flame wars are over. Everyone knows everyone else's strengths and weaknesses in the software, and you simply you work with the tool that you're best at, and you do your job, and you hand that work off to someone else, and then they go in and they finesse it, and then they may hand it back to you. So that's basically the way it's working in production today. Is everyone uses the tool that they're most comfortable with, and that's best suited for the job at hand.
Yeah, and as Hussein mentioned in the chat, FBX would be the way to basically go between them. That would be the file format to use.
Exactly, because native Max files don't read in Maya, and native Maya files don't read in Max, so FBX is a very good alternative there. Were there any other questions?
None so far that I'm seeing.
If not, that's okay. So for the additional resources, you guys will be receiving this PowerPoint after as well. I've added the Joan of Arc tutorial. It essentially includes box and planar modeling. So I think most people have heard of it, but in case that you haven't, or you haven't tried it, it's a really good tool. Even if you've already been modeling for a long time, it's always a good refresher to go in and kind of model from orthographic views and from visual reference like that, and just to kind of get back in touch with it, especially if you haven't done planar modeling in a long time. I know I haven't, so it was a good refresher for myself. I also have a link to the Autodesk 3ds Max Learning channel. So on there is all of the Autodesk official tutorials. So there's some great stuff on there if you're interested. And then also a link to our previous sessions and presentations for the webinars. Previously, I think Hussein has supplemental videos as well, so those will also be on there. And if you need to, you can email us directly at autodesk.help.webinars@autodesk.com with any additional questions, either about this presentation for myself or any previous presentations, things like that. Just let us know, and we'd be happy to take a look and listen and answer your questions.
Another question here.
Sure.
It was basically, there was nothing that looked similar to, so in Maya we have a delete history, so you can do edit delete by type history on a mesh, and because Maya stores kind of all the history with any tweaks or if you delete a component, things like that. Is that the same as the modifier list that you have, right? That's kind of what I took.
Yeah, let me go back in here really quick. That's a great question, because it is a little different in Max than it is in Maya. So this whole history here is not anything like Maya's, where you don't actually have access to it. You can actually just go to this trash can and delete everything off of here if necessary. So I think that was the question, because it doesn't actually have like any memory other than what these modifiers hold, which you can
you bake it though? Can you bake it and then, so basically bake it and delete all of that information that's there?
Absolutely.
Yes, you can collapse the modifier stack before you get ready to render.
Exactly.
You'll often keep max scenes where you'll have preliminary versions of models, or you'll have sort of the beauty version of a model where you want to keep the entire modifier stack, especially if you're returning to that file later, because you want to see exactly what the construction history was. But then when you're satisfied with it, you're getting ready to render. The modifier stack in Max, it's a great procedural tool, but it also can be memory intensive with a lot of things. So best practices is when you are ready to render, just go ahead and collapse everything down to the modifier stack end result, and then render. Mm-hmm.
Yep, absolutely. And right here, that's exactly what I just did. That's also a great question. So I just right-clicked when I had all my modifiers here, selected the object, right-clicked, went to Convert To, and you can choose to do an editable mesh, editable poly, or editable patch. I normally do an editable poly, and you'll see that this is baked. You don't have any way to revert it back other than the undo button, whereas this one, you actually have control over the modifier itself. Now you have all this baked. Were there any other questions before we end today? I know I went through some of this a little bit fast. There was quite a few things to cover, but any questions at all, please feel free to ask. And I think we'll be covering some texturing and some UV mapping going forward. Like I said before, this right here is not necessarily, if we take all this off, this is not the best way to texture an object. You can do it very simplistically this way. I did a box just because this was a box, so it'll map all 4 sides of it. You can also do planar, and you can see that on the sides here you get stretching because it's not considering those sides. It's only considering the top and the bottom here. You can also do cylindrical depending on the shape, shrink wrap, which kind of packs it into the object. Box is pretty preferable for most things. And then normally you would go in and actually unwrap an object where you would have certain UV layouts so that you could go in and paint them or use multiple textures on them accordingly, and you can indicate any stitching you have or any small details that you want in a particular area. You don't want to just go in and use a UV map like this because you may not be able to, say you want like a little tear on this side over here. If you're using UV map, it's very difficult to go in and position something like that here unless you have an all-over texture. But again, UVW Unwrap in 3ds Max is very useful for that because you can actually go in to a program like Sketchbook Pro, Photoshop, and kind of layer those on top of your texture so that you have this beautiful texture when you're done to add to an object. So it makes it more realistic too, because you're not getting, tiling or repeating in that sense. So just another thing to think about going forward. We will be kind of covering some of that later on. I think Hussein is going to be talking about it for the next webinar. Don't quote me on that though. But I think that is all for today, guys. So if, let me know if you have any other questions. But other than that, I think we pretty much covered everything.
Yeah, thank you very much for attending.
Yes, thank you. So I will be sending out this PowerPoint as well so that all of the links are available to everybody. Again, if you haven't checked out the tutorial, I definitely encourage you to. It may be something that you've done a long time ago or something that you don't really consider your skill level. Maybe you're very advanced, but even somebody who's been modeling or animating for 25 years, it's always good to go back and refresh and kind of start with the basics again, because there are times when you get so involved in your own workflows that you kind of lose sight of these things that we started with that might be helpful in the long run. So just something to consider. But I wanted to thank you all today for joining us, and I look forward to having you all at the next webinar. Have a great day, everyone.